All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Daily Power Parsha. It's great to see you. So today's January 20th, 2021. It's a palindrome, as they say, right? 1202021. Yeah, looks accurate to me. January 20th, 2021. This is the Torah portion of Bo. And we are up to reading number 3. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Let's jump right into the discussion. The goal for today, just so you know, is to do readings 3 and 4, and then we'll be caught up through today. Okay, here we go. This is a continuation of the conversation of the ninth plague. So just in the second reading, at the tail end of the second reading, we read about the ninth plague, which was the plague of darkness. And we said the darkness, it wasn't just dark. It was a tangible darkness where the Egyptians couldn't move. The Jews could move freely through the spaces. The Egyptians could not move. They were stuck in their place. An interesting side note about that I did not mention yesterday. So it says that one of the promises of the Exodus was that the Jewish people would take out from Egypt silver and gold from their Egyptian neighbors. And it was during the ninth plague of darkness that the Jews were able to move through the Egyptian homes and kind of scout out the gold and silver. This is what the commentaries say. I'm not judging it. I'm just telling you what the commentaries say. They were able to peer into the homes and walk through the homes. And then when the Exodus did happen, and they turned to their neighbors and they said, all right, time to give us some of your gold and silver. And they said, we don't have any. The Jews would say, well, actually, in your third drawer, in your dining room, I recall seeing a pair of candlesticks or whatever it is. And so that was another benefit or another function of the ninth plague of darkness. Okay, so that is that. Now, what happens on the heels or in the aftermath of the ninth plague? Here we go. Exodus chapter 10, verse 24. Pharaoh summoned Moses, and he said, go, worship the Lord, but your flocks and your cattle shall be left. Your young children may also go with you. If you recall, one plague ago, Pharaoh was also asking Moses, who would you like? All right, I'm ready to let you go, but who's going to go? And Moses says, the young and the old, men and women, and all of our cattle flocks. And Pharaoh says, no kids, nothing doing, only the men. I guess no women also, only the men. And Moses said, no deal. So now Pharaoh is renegotiating. He says, all right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to let you go. The adults and your young children may also go with you, but your flocks and cattle shall be left. Don't take your flocks and your cattle. All right, well, that's a non-starter, right? As you know, if you're doing offerings, you need the animals. But Moses said, you too shall give sacrifice and burnt offerings into our hands, and we will make them for the Lord our God. In other words, not only are we going to take our cattle, but we're going to take your cattle as well. And also our cattle will go with us, not a single hoof. Look at this line. Not a single hoof will remain, for we will take from it to worship the Lord our God, and we do not know how much we will worship the Lord until we arrive there. In other words, there's no telling how many sacrifices we are going to need to bring until we arrive at that designated place. So we're taking all the animals. Well, you guessed it. The Lord strengthened Pharaoh's heart. We spoke about that yesterday, what that means, and he was unwilling to let them out. Pharaoh said to Moses, go away from me. Beware, you shall no longer see my face, for on the day that you see my face, you shall die. That's Pharaoh's warning to Moses. Thereupon Moses said, you have spoken correctly. I shall no longer see your face. That was the last time that Moses went to Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, don't come back. And Moses says, no problem. You should know, parenthetically, we're going to read it inside, certainly, but just so you know, by the 10th plague, which is the next plague coming up, Moses doesn't Pharaoh. Pharaoh goes to Moses. And he says, all right, you all have to leave. It's time to leave now, etc. So, but Moses, at this point, he's done with Pharaoh. Exodus chapter 11, here we go. God tells Moses about plague number 10. The Lord said to Moses, I will bring one more plague upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards, he will let you go from here. When he lets you out, he will completely drive you out of here. So clearly, God knows what's going to happen, right? As you could guess, right? And clearly, God knows that this last plague is going to be the one that seals the deal for the Exodus. At this point, with the last plague, it's going to happen. You could ask the question, if it took this plague, death of the firstborn, for Pharaoh to let the Jewish people go, so why wasn't that just one plague? Why not one and done, right? Just first plague, death of the firstborn, that would be it. We've discussed this. We discussed it yesterday and before. I think even part of this experience was education. Education about the power of Hashem, about the nature of miracles, the nature of nature, supernatural. And so part of it is an iterative experience where education happens step by step. It doesn't happen all in one fell swoop. If the objective was just to let the Jewish people go, yeah, maybe just bring this last plague and be done. But if the message is education and the kind of wow, Pharaoh, Egypt, and the Jewish people, then the process is a bit different, and it's what we see with the 10 plagues. Hope that makes sense. Let's continue verse number 2. God says to Moses, please, God continues to tell Moses, please speak into the ears of the people and let them borrow each man from his friend and each woman from her friend silver vessels and golden vessels. And this is what I mentioned before, that they were meant to borrow, and I guess that's a bit of a loose term, borrow, the silver and the gold of Egypt. But it says, please. Why please? Because God had told Abraham 400 years prior, and we read it inside a few weeks ago, or several weeks ago. God told Abraham at the covenant, they made a covenant, a pact between themselves. God told Abraham, you should know your children, descendants will be servants in a foreign land to a foreign nation. But afterwards, they're going to go out with great wealth. That's what he told Abraham. So God says here, please speak to the people that they should take out silver and gold when they leave. Why please? Please, because I want to make sure that my promise, says God, is fulfilled, that they're going to go out with great wealth. If not, then I will have been incorrect. So what happened? So the Lord gave the people favor in the Egyptians' eyes. Also, the man Moses was highly esteemed in the land of Egypt, in the eyes of Pharaoh's servants, and in the eyes of the people. So the Jewish people's esteem rose at this point. What I told you before, by the way, is cited in Rashi. Please speak, Rashi says, that is only an expression of request, which means it's like God is pleading almost. God is requesting. The verse is saying, I ask you to learn about this, i.e. to ask their neighbors for vessels, so that the righteous man Abraham will not say, God fulfilled the promise that they will enslave them and oppress them, but he did not fulfill with them afterwards that will go forth with great possessions, right? Abraham could have complained against God. Abraham would say to God, God, you fulfilled one half of the promise about the enslavement, but what about the great wealth part? Never happened. That's why God says to Moses, please, you guys got to take out the stuff. You guys got to take out the wealth so that I don't look like, my promise wasn't fulfilled. All right, that's the third reading. So what we read about is the aftermath of the 9th plague of darkness and the initial messages about the 10th and final plague. All right, here we go. Moses said, verse 4, chapter, Moses said, let's see if Rashi says something about this. Okay, Rashi clarifies that this was, when did Moses say, we didn't even read what he says yet, but when did he say this message in verse 4? Rashi says, when he stood before Pharaoh, this prophecy was said to him. In other words, in the previous conversation, the one where Pharaoh said, don't see my face again, he already told him this. For after Moses left Pharaoh's presence, he did not see his face again. I mentioned to you before, when Pharaoh said, don't come back, Moses never came back. So when did Moses say this about the 10th plague? Before. That's how Rashi clarifies it based on our sages. Hope that makes sense. So what did Moses say? This is the message about the 10th plague. So said the Lord, at the dividing point of the night, which is midnight, but like the precise point of midnight, God says, I will go out. Moses is quoting God, saying, I will go out into the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt will die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sits on his throne, to the firstborn of the slave woman who is behind the millstones, and every firstborn animal. What this, I don't know what you want to call it, prophecy, promise, warning is, basically all the firstborn Egyptians are going to perish. From Pharaoh's firstborn to the slave woman's firstborn, not the Jewish slave woman, but the Egyptians had other slaves, and all the firstborn animals. And there will be a great cry throughout the entire land of Egypt, such as there never has been, and such as there shall never be again. Right? You can imagine the great cry. But to all the children of Israel, not one dog will wet its tongue against either man or beast. That means that the dogs will not bark, notwithstanding the death and the anxiousness that's going on in Egypt. But not one dog will bark, in order that you shall know that the Lord will separate between the Egyptians and between Israel. So it's interesting. It's interesting that you would think the contrast would be that every firstborn of Egypt will die, but every firstborn of the Jewish people will not die. It doesn't say that. It says every firstborn of Egypt will die, but for the children of Israel, not one dog will bark. It's like, what? You tell me that the death of the firstborn is for the Egyptians, but not for the Jews, fine. But it doesn't say this. It says death of the firstborn for the Egyptians, and for the Jewish people, not even a dog is going to bark. My understanding is that it's saying, obviously, moreover, it's not just, right? Not just are we talking about the fact that the Jews are not going to lose anyone in this plague. They won't, no firstborns will die, but there won't even be any anxiousness. There won't even be any commotion, any drama within the Jewish neighborhood. Anyway, and what's the point? In order that you should know that the Lord will separate between the Egyptians and between Israel. Let's continue. And all these servants of yours will come down to me and prostrate themselves to me, saying, go out, you and all the people who are at your feet. This is, by the way, this is Moses saying. This is Moses. Moses tells Pharaoh, all these servants of yours, Pharaoh, your servants are going to come down to me and bow down, and they're going to say, go out. Moses, get out. You and all the people who are at your feet. In other words, you and your people. And then Moses tells Pharaoh afterwards, I will go out. Then Moses exited from Pharaoh with burning anger. Now the question is, who had the burning anger? Let's see if Rashi clarifies who had the burning anger. Rashi says, because Pharaoh had said to him, you shall no longer see my face. I'm not sure who had the burning anger. Maybe Pharaoh. I don't think Moses was angry. I think he was just stating the warning, and just FYI, this is what's going to happen. I think Pharaoh, it makes sense to me that Pharaoh is the one who was burning angry, and he said, never come back here. I don't want to see your face again. All right. The Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh, after this, By the way, FYI, Pharaoh's not going to listen. Pharaoh will not heed you in order to, once again, increase my miracles in the land of Egypt. Even after this stark warning about plague number 10, he's still not going to listen. Moses and God knew, and indeed it was. Moses and Aaron had performed all these miracles before Pharaoh, but the Lord strengthened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel out of his land. That kind of summarizes, where we're holding right before plague number 10. He has the warning that it's going to go down, death of the firstborn. He still can't pull the trigger, Pharaoh. All right. And now what's interesting is, and this is honestly not only a departure from the story, Exodus chapter 12, but it's a departure from the entire structure or entire style of Torah up until now, from the beginning, from Genesis. So from the beginning of the Torah until now, it's been narrative. Creation, Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, etc. Suddenly, and then Joseph and Egypt and Moses and Pharaoh and plagues, right? I'm catching you up from the beginning till here. That's pretty much what it's been talking about. It's all narrative. Completely switches gears. You know the other style of Torah, the mitzvah style. God said, do this. God spoke to Moses, do that. This is where it begins. Chapter 12 of Exodus. Here we go. The first mitzvah. The Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this is the first mitzvah commanded to the Jewish people. This month shall be to you the head of months. To you it shall be the first of the months of the year. What's the mitzvah? A few different pieces to it. Number one, the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, that the Jewish calendar goes by the lunar cycle. So that is instituted here, the Jewish calendar, number one. The months, by the way, the calendar is also reconciled with the solar cycle because of the Jewish leap years, etc., and to keep the holidays in the right climate seasons. Passover always has to be in the spring, for example, but the months go by the moon. I want to share with you a Rashi. Talk Rashi back on. Take a look at Rashi. You ready? Look at this. So Rashi says, "Chodesh as a chodesh, right? Rosh Chodesh. Rosh means head, like the first of, and Chodesh is month. But Chodesh also means chadash, which means new or renewal. So the sun is not renewed each month. Nothing happens to the sun each month. But the moon, there's a monthly cycle of lunar cycle of the moon. It disappears, at least from sight, and then it comes back. It's renewed. So Chodesh, which is the Jewish word for month, Chodesh, is related to Chadash, new, renewal, hence the connection. Lunar month, lunar cycle, lunar calendar. So Rashi says Hebrew literally means this renewal. Take a look at the next part. God showed Moses the moon in its renewal. In other words, he showed him what the new moon looks like, the little sliver of moon that reappears after it disappears. And he said to him, God said to Moses, when the moon renews itself, you will have a new month. Look at that. When does the month begin, the Jewish month begin? When the moon renews itself. Chadash. Nevertheless, despite this rendering, a biblical verse, Rashi says, does not lose its simple meaning. Concerning the month of Nisan, he said to him, this shall be the first of the order of the number of the months, so Iyar shall be called the second month, and Sivan the third month, etc. In other words, there's two implications of this verse. Number one, the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, the mitzvah of the lunar months, Jewish calendar, is designated right now. In Egypt, prior to the Exodus, God gives Moses commandment number one, y'all need to have a calendar, right? How are you going to celebrate this holiday? How are you going to mark this occasion if you don't have a calendar? So you got to have a calendar, you got to have a lunar calendar. That's mitzvah number one. The second point, as Rashi says, the literal meaning of it is that now that you have a calendar, now that you have a way to count months by the lunar cycle, which is the first month, this one will be month number 1. Henceforth in Torah, month 1 is not the month when Rosh Hashanah is, the new year. Month number 1 is always Nisan, month of Passover. In biblical language, when the Torah says, for example, the Torah says, let me stop sharing so I can see you better. The Torah says Rosh Hashanah, the new calendar year, takes place on the first day of the 7th month. So bizarre, right? How would a new year begin in the 7th month? I don't have a good answer, but I'm just saying that God designates at this point that in biblical language, month 1 will always be the month of Nisan, the month in which Passover is, the month in which the Exodus happened. That's month 1. 7 months later, month number 7, or 6 months later, month number 7 is Tishrei, the Jewish New Year. But it also tells us something, I think, important, as Kabbalah explains. There are 2 years, or 2 dimensions. There's the beginning of nature and the beginning of the supernatural. So Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, represents the beginning of the anniversary of creation of the world, which is the creation of nature. But the Exodus is the creation, well, not creation, but it's the emergence of miracles, the supernatural, the impossible. That also needs to have its own identity. And the message here is that, in fact, month number 1, henceforth, is miracles. That's our first. It's almost like, what's Latin, modus operandi or something like that? How do we relate to the world? Do we first work with natural means and then, just go above and beyond? Or is our first approach, we go big and then we try to make it work with the nature? So it's almost like the message here is, no longer will month 1 be Tishrei, creation. Month 1 now is Nisan, miracles. All right, Donna, what were you going to say? Don't forget to unmute.
2 questions. So do we have a special Rose Hoder celebration for Nisan? And the second question is, super month or what, super Rosh Chodesh. And the other question is this when like the Jewish year started counting, like 57?
No. So good, both very good questions. I'm not aware of a special, like super duper Rosh Chodesh celebration for Nisan, although it might make sense. But I'm not aware of that. It's a special month. It's got Passover in it and all sorts of things. But as far as your second question, no. The calendar year, 5781, that always renews and triggers Tishrei, month 7. It's weird. Listen, every Jewish calendar will have as month 1 Tishrei. It's not going to, but in biblical language, in the Torah's language, right? And we've done this because we went through these verses, and a lot of them are in Leviticus and the book of Numbers and even Deuteronomy, when it goes through the cycle of the holidays with the commandments about how to observe them and the sacrifices. It literally will call Passover the 15th day of the first month, right? And it'll call Rosh Hashanah the first day of the 7th month, and Yom Kippur the 10th day of the 7th month. That's in biblical language. That's what it is. So, and this is where God, and again, I threw in some Kabbalah, which explains the spiritual significance that you have 2 beginnings. You have 2 approaches in life. You have the natural approach and the supernatural approach, nature and the miraculous. So creation is when God created the nature, of the universe. Creation, nature, right? The world runs by nature, usually. And the Exodus is all about the miracles, the plagues, the miracles, splitting the sea, right? It's all miraculous. So we have two approaches in life. The question is, what's 1 and what's 7, right? What's primary and what's secondary, so to speak. So we would think primary is, approach it through natural means. And then, if all else fails, then pray for a miracle. But there is, I probably should share this, I forget where this quote is from. It might even be from the Talmud. The Talmud says that, how a Jewish farmer approaches their occupation? Plants the seed and prays. So like every other farmer in the world says, it's going to grow. You plant the seed, it's going to grow. Like that's the way, because that's nature. But the Jewish farmer knows that there's no such thing as nature, right? I mean, it's all really controlled by God. And this too is a miracle, right? This is called the miracle first approach. And so the perspective is plant the seed, but that's not it. I got to pray to God. And then hopefully God will make it happen. Does that mean that it doesn't work if you don't pray? No, it also works if you don't pray, but it's a different experience. And so the question is, how do we experience life? Do we experience life as nature, or do we experience the supernatural? It's a perspective question. And the way Kabbalah explains it, the way at least I understand it, is that henceforth, what God is on a deeper level telling Moses and telling us through having it in Torah is that we should look at life through the lens of the miracle, the lens of the supernatural. It's an elevated existence. It's a beautiful thing. All right, so that's a little bit about that.
When did the counting start of years? Like we're in 5781. Oh, creation.
Yeah. By the way, how do we reconcile that with the age of the universe and fossils and carbon dating? This is a question certainly beyond the scope of a on 1 foot daily power parsha thing. But we've had years ago, we had an event, we had a lecture on this, a scientist that came in and spoke about it. I'll give you a few things on this. Number one, we know that Adam and Eve were created as adults, not as embryos, which means that on day one, they were already, let's say, 40 years old. What happened to the previous 40 years? Where is that time, right? There's a history embedded. Day one, there's already a history, a past. There's no past, but there's a past already embedded in the first moment. So it's not a stretch to say that God created a world, right? When God created vegetation, right? What was it? Seeds? Or was it vegetation? God created a functioning world. Moment one, it was already functioning. So where's its history? God is not subject to backdating time. It could just be, so who's to say, again, do I know? I can't, I wasn't there. But who's to say that God didn't create a world that already has an embedded history in the soil, right? Why not? Why not? Some say that it has to do with the flood and the heat and the water compress things and change the nature of things so that when we find things in the earth, it looks much older than it is. I'm not an expert. I'm doing some things that I've read and studied about. The first point is something that I believe the Rabbi writes about in letters to scientists who question this. But the short answer to your question is 5781 is from creation. The Exodus happens, by the way, 2448. 2448 in that count. So 5781 minus 2448 gives you how many years ago the Exodus happened? 3,300, and 48 to 81 is 33. Yeah. 3333. Maybe. Threes are wild. Could be that this Passover is going to be 3333. You know what? I have a calculator right here. Why not? 5781 minus 2448. Yeah. 3,300. Well, we're not at Passover yet, but this Passover is going to be 3333 since the Exodus. It's not that long ago. I mean, but it kind of is also. Anyway, all right. So that's that. Let's jump back into the text. But I hope you're seeing already that the style is changing, because now we have mitzvahs. When we didn't have mitzvah, I mean, God was speaking to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob and telling them to go here, go there, but not on this level of Rosh Chodesh and you'll see it's going to continue. Next mitzvah. Ready? Verse 3. Speak to the entire community of Israel, saying on the 10th of this month, so the 10th day of this month of Nisan, month number 1, let each one take a lamb for each parental home, a lamb for each household, 1 lamb per household. This is in Egypt. This is what we call the Paschal lamb. This was the offering that they were to bring right before the Exodus. The Exodus, and just, the Exodus happens on day number 15 of the month. This conversation is on day 1, and the message is on day 10, bring this offering, take a lamb. Now, if the household, I love the nitty gritty, but if the household is too small for a lamb, in other words, they can't eat a whole lamb. It's like 3 people. How are they going to eat a whole lamb? Or 2 people? Then he and his neighbor who is nearest to his house shall take one according to the number of people, each one according to one's ability to eat, shall you be counted for the lamb. So join up. You can have 2 households joining together for the lamb. I love how specific it gets here with the, how to break it down. You shall have a perfect male lamb in its first year. You may take it either from the sheep or from the goats. And you shall keep it for inspection. So gather it on the 10th day and keep it for inspection until the 14th day of this month. And the entire congregation of the community of Israel shall slaughter in the afternoon. By the way, the 14th day of Nisan is what we call today Erev Pesach. It's the eve of Passover. So the Seder is always at night. So the afternoon before the Seder, when everyone's getting ready for the Seder, is when they would bring this, they brought this up. Is when they brought this offering that first time. And then subsequently, commemoration, when we had a temple, they would do the same thing on the 14th day in the afternoon. And they shall take, this is unique to Egypt, of course, they shall take some of the blood of this offering and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel on the houses in which they eat it. So paint, not the town red, but paint the door frame red with the blood of the offering. And that's how the angel of death pass over the Jewish homes. And on this night, they shall eat the flesh of the lamb roasted over the fire. God is very specific with the menu. God is not playing around here. God is like, this is what you're going to have tonight for the meal. Or not tonight. You slaughter the animal on the afternoon of the 14th, but you eat it on the night of, because the Jewish day starts at night. So that night, which is the beginning of the 15th, which is Passover. So that's when they were supposed to eat it. Paschal lamb. So eat it roasted over fire with unleavened cakes, which is matzah. In the Hebrew, it's matzos. Unleavened cakes with bitter herbs, the marar. Straight up. This is it. This is Passover. If you ever wonder, where does it come from that we're supposed to eat matzah and marar? Right here. But what we don't do today is we don't have a Paschal lamb because that's a sacrifice, and we don't do sacrifices today. We don't even replicate it. That's why many have a custom to not eat lamb, for example, on the Seders. So to not even mimic, to not even make it seem like we're trying to replicate it. You shall not eat it rare. Again, very specific how to cook it. Don't eat it rare or boiled in water, no sous vide, except roasted over the fire, its head with its legs and with its innards. And you shall not leave over any of it until morning. No leftovers. Remember, if you can't eat it, join up with another household, and whatever is left over of it until morning, you shall burn it in fire, because it's considered to be a sacrifice, so you can't eat it. So let me just explain this line over here. When you're dealing with a sacrifice, you have to eat it in the sacrificial state, or within the parameters of the mitzvah. You can't eat it the next day as lunch, in a pita, because then it's not the Seder. You have to eat it that night, and the rest has to be burned in fire. And this is how you shall eat it. Listen to this one, verse 11. This is how you shall eat it: your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, your staff in your hand. In other words, get ready to bounce. You're going to have this meal. This is what we call well, no one calls it this, but I'm going to call it this, the Last Supper. This is it. This is your last meal in Egypt. So make sure your belt is on. Make sure your shoes are on. Make sure you have your walking stick in your hands. That's it. And you shall eat it in haste. It's a Passover sacrifice to the Lord. And it was get ready to bounce. You're going to eat the meal. Exodus. I will pass through, God says, I will pass through the land of Egypt. Remember, this is God communicating to Moses. I will pass through the land of Egypt on this night, and I will smite every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and upon all the gods of Egypt will I wreak judgments, I, the Lord. And the blood, remember the blood on the doorposts, the blood will be for you a sign upon the houses where you will be, and I will see the blood and skip over you. Why did they mess up the translation? Passover. How'd they write skip? Who's editing this thing, right? God says, I will skip over you. I will pass over you. That works so much better for Passover. I will pass over you, and there will be no plague to destroy you when I smite the people of the land of Egypt. And this day shall be for you as a memorial, and you celebrate it as a festival for the Lord. In other words, this is not a one-time deal. It should be an annual celebration. Throughout your generations, you shall celebrate it as an everlasting statute. This is why we have a Seder every year. There we go. That's why. That's why we have a Seder every Passover. It's the most observed Jewish holiday, either Passover, Yom Kippur, whatever. Certainly at home, it's the most observed Jewish celebration. Right here, Exodus chapter 12, verse 14, annual celebration. For 7 days you shall eat matzah, unleavened cakes. But on the preceding day you shall clear away all leaven. Get rid of the chametz, get rid of the bread and the Cheerios from your houses. For whoever eats leaven from the first day until the seventh day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. Okay. And on the first day there shall be a holy convocation. And on the seventh day you shall have a holy convocation. No work. What is a holy convocation? No work may be performed on them. But what is eaten by any soul, that alone may be performed for you. That means that you're allowed to cook on the holiday. So what you're eating, you're allowed to cook, but otherwise no work on the first and seventh days of Passover. The middle days, you're allowed to do work. But on the first day, on the seventh day, you don't do work. And you shall watch over the matzah, the unleavened cakes. Guard your matzah. For on this very, make sure it doesn't become chametz. Make sure it doesn't rise. Take it out of the oven. For on this very day I have taken your legions out of the land of Egypt, and you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting statute. In the first month, told you, first month, right? Not Rosh Hashanah, but Nisan, not Tishrei, but Nisan. The first month, on the 14th day of the month, in the evening, which is the 15th already, all right, you shall eat unleavened cakes, matzah, until, for 7 days, because no chametz, until the 21st day of the month in the evening. So from the onset of Passover until the end of Passover, we switch out our baguettes and bagels and whatever, and bread. The 3 B's, we switch it out for flat. Manischewitz is very happy. For 7 days, leavening shall not be found in your house, no chametz. For whoever eats leavening, that soul shall be cut off from the community of Israel, both among the strangers and the native born of the land. You shall not eat any leavening. Throughout all your dwellings, you shall eat unleavened cakes. All right. So there we have the mitzvah of, so let's recap what we've done. What mitzvahs we have here. Number 1, Rosh Chodesh. Number 2, month of Nisan is the first month. Number 3, Paschal Lamb. Number 4, the menu. Where's the menu? Here, the menu is lamb with matzah and bitter herbs. Number 4, oh, I think I skipped. Yeah, the blood on the doorpost. It's another mitzvah. Make sure you roast it over fire. Don't leave it till the morning. I mean, all the details that we spoke about. Only matzah, no chametz. All right, that's it. So as I told you, when we got into this a few minutes ago, this marks, it straight up marks a departure from the style of Torah up until now, which is very much narrative driven. It's very much about a story, a story of people and certainly lessons in the stories. But now it's getting very, very specific, and it doesn't really stop from, we will have stories, but a lot of it is going to also be mitzvahs. Rashi, the very first Rashi of Torah, interestingly enough, Rashi asked the question, why doesn't the Torah begin with the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh? If the Torah is about laws, about the mitzvot, it should begin, literally, Rashi asks, why doesn't the Torah begin Exodus chapter 12, verse 1, HaChodesh Hazeh, this month shall be the first of the months for you, etc. The mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh. Why does it begin there? Why do we need the whole story of creation, the whole story of Adam and Eve? We would know that story anyway, because we could have the Medrash, we could have other sources, but the written Torah, which is a document of, you would think, a document of laws, why do you need all the stories? It's a question. Rashi asks this question. And Rashi answers something very interesting. He says, because if that would have been the case, the nations of the world would have told the Jewish people, you are robbers, you are thieves for taking the land of Israel, ultimately. But because the Torah begins with creation, the response is, look, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and God decided who he was going to give it to. And God let these people live in it. And then God said, I'm going to give it to the Jewish people. So it's establishing, this is what Rashi says. Rashi says the whole beginning of the Torah is in essence countering the claim the land of Israel created it, right? Here's the whole story. Here's the story of Adam and Eve, the story of Noah and the flood, the story of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebecca and Jacob and Rachel and Leah. And here's the story. Here are the promises. Here's the covenants. And now the rest of it makes sense. So that's one perspective. It's an interesting perspective. The Rebbe speaks about this from a mystical perspective. What the Torah should follow a certain pattern just to counteract, the anti-Semite who wants to say that the Jews should leave Israel. Like, God adds a book and a half or a book and a little bit for the one. And is that person even going to be satisfied with this answer? Right? The one who wants to cause trouble. I think be like, oh, well, Torah says in that case. So there's a lot to talk about, but I just wanted to mention, the question is I think is fascinating. Why does the Torah tell us the stories? Could it just begun? Now, I like the stories, but on one level, it's interesting that, one could have argued, maybe we don't need the stories. Anyway, something to think about, and you can certainly look it up and research it on your own and see more answers. But it's definitely an interesting shift that we have right now in the middle of the story. Oh, by the way, we have these mitzvahs, but it is part of the narrative also, right? It's leading up to plague 10 and leading up to the Exodus. God says, but before I let you go, I want to give you a few mitzvahs, calendar, the Passover offering, etc. And our sages explained it's because we needed to have some merits under our belt, some mitzvahs to take out with us. Otherwise we would be a little bit, empty of mitzvahs because we didn't have any mitzvahs as a nation, unique mitzvahs. Everyone had the Noahide laws, the basic decency laws. Not that the Egyptians were following that, but those were laws for all mankind, but uniquely Jewish laws that would give us the merit to carry us through with the Exodus. So this is what's going on. I hope that makes sense. Questions, comments? Matt, it's good to see you. One thing before a question, Matt, I saw you ask, how are you feeling? I'm feeling a little bit better, so thank God. Thank God. All right, questions, comments? Wait, don't forget to unmute.
No. Okay.
You're good?
Okay. So is there kosher pet food, like for cats kosher for Passover?
Yeah, just Google it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a big thing because it's not just we're supposed to eat it. We're really not supposed to have it in our homes. Now, you could actually keep it in your home if you put it away in a closet or on a shelf, and you kind of tape it up, and you close it out, and you sell it as well, which I think we've talked about before and when Passover came around. But yeah, if you're actively using it, even if not for you, but even if for a pet, yeah, there are ways around it. I can't tell you specifics. My mother probably could, but there's definitely ways to do it. Yeah. All right, good. Donna, thanks for the links.
The last one is the one that the rabbi was referring to. That shows the pictures, the one that's the ADL. That gives the best synopsis.
ADL, why isn't it opening when? Oh, it just opened now for me. Okay, good.
It shows
Racist, extremist. Oh, yeah, I remember seeing that. Racist, extremist, anti-Semitic conspiracies surround coronavirus vaccine rollout. Oh man, it's so unfortunate. Oh man, look at that. Where is this from?
I think it took place in England. I think it started in Europe, and then
these comics, very troubling.
I know, and then I guess it expanded a bit here, maybe in some of the extremist groups.
Yeah, well, thank God for the ADL. They're always monitoring this and calling it out. At least doing what they can to suppress this stuff. I don't know. What are you gonna do, right?
So in Monday's class with Rabbi Schusterman, I forget how it became part of it, but as part of the lesson on the bankruptcy, he mentioned, I forget what he was relating it to, but that we always have to consider ourselves a stranger in a strange land and always have to be on guard.
Interesting. I will tell you, I mean, look, thank God we are where we are, and it's a by and large, it's a wonderful country, and gives us such freedoms, etc., and everybody such freedoms, again, by and large. But I'm not a doomsdayer. I'm just saying it would be foolish to think that it could never turn on us. It would be foolish, and it would deny history. Now, am I predicting something? Of course not. God forbid. But history has shown that every country that's been hospitable at some point has turned. So to think that it can't happen, I mean, it's just, I think that's reckless thinking. I think it's also reckless to predict, doom and gloom. I'm not predicting that. I'm just saying we always have to be careful. We always have to recognize, that we're not in our, in our homeland. It's not to stay. There's a story in the Talmud. The Talmud says a rabbi once remarked that he was traveling with some friends in a boat, and they arrived to an island, and they got a boat and they jumped onto the island, and they were cooking food. And after a little bit, suddenly the island started moving, and it turned over, and the island flipped them into the water. And they realized that it wasn't an island, it was a massive fish. And had the boat not been nearby, they would have died, they would have drowned. Such a bizarre story. And one of the Talmudic rabbis says, this happened with me. So the commentators explain it's an allegory, it's a metaphor, right? What's the metaphor? The metaphor is to our history as a people, right? We come to a place and we settle in, and it's comfortable, and we start barbecuing and whatever. And at a certain point, so thank God, what's the boat? The boat is Torah. The boat is our identity. Thank God we have, at least something to hold on to when everything else shifts. But the point is that things are always shifting. In fact, that analogy by the commentators are understanding it specifically to refer to the upcoming holiday of Purim, of course, which talks about when, the Jews were in relative comfort, and then they were in danger with Haman. thank God it turned around with Esther, but it just goes to show you that we can never be, what's the word I'm looking for?
Complacent.
Complacent. Take things for granted. That's it's not a healthy perspective. Speaking of Purim, I saw at some point, it's been a complicated few weeks for me, but I saw at some point that you wrote about the dates, right, of the Purim thing. So I think I wrote 2 dates, and you said one of them was RCS, so we should do it the next
Yes.
week.
Yes.
So let's set it for then. I think it's in about 1 month.
Yeah, the 22nd.
22nd, okay.
And we're gonna do it the same concept, the dual registration bonuses.
Yeah. I have everything from the with the description from the email that you sent. I looked through it a little bit ago. I don't remember the details, but yeah, we could do it the same way.
Because that way you're putting them both up at the same time. So with the bonus, that gives them motivation to sign up at the same time.
If there's a, let me